She had offered to help. "Welcome back and enjoy the story." Margaret Sullivan stood at her son's doorstep, the morning light casting long shadows across the porch of the elegant Chicago brownstone. At 63, she still carried herself, with the quiet confidence that had made her one of the Windy City's most respected business leaders. The passing years had etched fine lines around her eyes, but they had done nothing to diminish the sharp intelligence that gleamed within them. In one hand, she balanced a basket of freshly baked sourdough bread, still warm from her oven. In the other, she clutched a small handmade card from her 5-year-old granddaughter, Lily. She didn't need to knock. She had a key. She had always had a key, ever since she had purchased the house for Nathan and Ursula 3 years ago, when Nathan's architectural firm was still finding its footing, and Ursula was pregnant with Lily. It had been Margaret's gift to them, a foundation upon which they could build their future. The deed remained in her name. A technicality, she had told herself, something to be addressed when the time was right. Margaret slipped inside, the familiar scent of the home, a mixture of Nathan's cologne and the lavender cleaning products Ursula preferred, greeting her like an old friend. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of running water upstairs and Lily's soft humming from the kitchen. Margaret moved through the hallway, her footsteps barely audible on the hardwood floors she had helped select. "Grandma!" Lily's excited squeal cut through the morning stillness as the little girl came bounding around the corner, her pajamas mismatched, her dark curls untamed. She crashed into Margaret's legs, wrapping her small arms around them with the uninhibited joy only children can express. Margaret set the breadbasket down and knelt to embrace her granddaughter properly, inhaling the sweet scent of sleep and strawberry shampoo that clung to her. "Good morning, my sunshine," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead. "I brought fresh bread for breakfast. Yay, can we have it with the special honey? The one from the farmer's market?" Lily bounced on her toes, her small face alight with anticipation. "Of course we can," Margaret replied, rising to her feet and taking Lily's hand. "Let's go set the table for your parents, shall we?" They moved together toward the kitchen, Lily chattering about a dream involving purple elephants and flying bicycles. Margaret listened attentively, asking questions at all the right moments, her heart full with the simple joy of this morning ritual. 3 times a week she came early to help with Lily before Nathan and Ursula left for work. She never needed to be asked. She simply appeared, ready to lighten their load in any way she could. The kitchen gleamed with the morning sun streaming through the bay windows that Margaret had insisted upon during the renovation, knowing how important natural light was to a happy home. She helped Lily into her booster seat at the kitchen island and began preparing breakfast with practiced efficiency. She knew where everything belonged in this kitchen. She had, after all, designed it alongside the contractor when the house was being renovated, incorporating all the elements that she knew her son loved from his childhood home. Margaret was slicing the bread when she heard Ursula's voice drifting down the stairwell, the tone hushed but strangely clear in the morning quiet. "Yes, she's already here. Like clockwork." A pause. I know, it's just... she's always here. Like a maid who doesn't know when to leave." Margaret's hand stilled, the knife hovering above the bread loaf. The words landed like ice water down her spine. "I mean, I appreciate the help, but does she need to be here so often? Nathan says she's lonely since his father died, but it's been 5 years. Shouldn't she have, I don't know, found something else to do with her time by now?" Another pause, followed by Ursula's light laugh, the kind that Margaret had once found charming at family gatherings. Now it sounded brittle and cruel. "The worst part is Nathan won't say anything. It's his mother, after all, and the house... well, you know the situation with that. Anyway, I should go. She's probably downstairs reorganizing my pantry again, or something equally intrusive." Margaret didn't realize she had been holding her breath until Lily's small voice broke through her stunned silence. "Grandma, are you okay? Your face looks funny." With tremendous effort, Margaret forced her features into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about all the things we can do today." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too high, too thin. She finished slicing the bread, her movements mechanical now. The joy of the morning ritual evaporated. She heard Ursula's footsteps on the stairs, then Nathan's deeper tread following behind. Margaret busied herself with the coffee maker, filling it with the premium Colombian beans that Nathan preferred, another detail she remembered without having to be told. "Morning, Mum." Nathan's voice was warm as he entered the kitchen, crossing over to kiss her cheek. At 35, he was the spitting image of his late father, tall and lean, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was still fastening his cufflinks, the antique silver pair that had belonged to his grandfather, which Margaret had given him on his wedding day. "You didn't have to come so early. We could have managed." "It's no trouble," Margaret replied, the words automatic. She glanced over his shoulder to where Ursula was entering the kitchen, her sleek blonde hair perfectly styled, her cream-colored blouse and tailored slacks immaculate. Ursula was everything Margaret had never been, effortlessly fashionable, innately social, born into the kind of old Chicago money that Margaret had spent decades earning through her own grit and determination. "Morning, Margaret," Ursula said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Bread again, you're so thoughtful." There was something in the way she said thoughtful that made Margaret wonder how many other conversations like the one she had just overheard had taken place in this house. How many times had her presence been discussed as an inconvenience rather than a blessing? "Good morning, Ursula," Margaret replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her hands. "I thought it might be nice for Lily's breakfast." "Mommy, Grandma says we can have it with the special honey," Lily exclaimed, oblivious to the subtle current of tension now running through the kitchen. "That sounds lovely, darling," Ursula said, dropping a quick kiss on her daughter's head before reaching for the coffee Margaret had just poured. "Nathan, we need to leave in 20 minutes if you want to make that meeting with the Westbrook clients." Nathan nodded, checking his watch. Right. Mum, you're sure you're okay watching Lily until preschool? Mrs. Henderson could come? Over if you have plans." "I always have time for Lily," Margaret said softly. She looked down at her granddaughter, who was now carefully spreading honey on a slice of bread, her small tongue poking out in concentration. "We'll have a wonderful morning, won't we, sunshine?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, her curls bouncing. "We're going to read my new library book and play with my blocks, and Grandma promised to teach me how to make paper cranes." Margaret watched as Nathan and Ursula moved around the kitchen in their morning dance, gathering keys, checking phones, sipping coffee, existing in the comfortable life that she had helped create for them. She had never asked for gratitude, never sought recognition for the million small and large ways she had supported their lives, but she had never expected to be viewed as an intrusion either. She thought of her late husband, Vincent, and what he might say if he were here to witness this moment. Vincent had always been her compass, her steady presence through 38 years of marriage, helping her navigate the complex waters of family and business with equal skill. He would know what to do now, how to address the hurt without causing a scene. But Vincent was gone, taken by a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, leaving Margaret to find her own way through a world that had shifted beneath her feet. She had thrown herself into helping Nathan and his young family, believing that her purpose lay in supporting them as they built their lives. Now she wasn't so sure. "All right, we're off," Nathan announced, gulping down the last of his coffee. He kissed Lily's forehead. "Be good for Grandma, okay, Pumpkin?" "I'm always good," Lily declared with the righteous indignation of a child who had never been anything but. Nathan laughed, then turned to Margaret. "Thanks, Mum. You're a lifesaver." "As always." Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as Ursula bent to whisper something in Lily's ear, making the child giggle, before straightening and catching Margaret's eye. "Don't worry about dinner tonight," Ursula said, adjusting her designer watch. "We'll probably grab something on the way home. Oh, and if you could maybe not rearrange the spice rack again. I had trouble finding the cumin last time you organized things." The comment was delivered with a smile, but Margaret felt it sting nonetheless. She had only been trying to help, placing the most frequently used spices at eye level for easier access. "Of course," she replied, her own smile fixed in place. "I'll leave everything just as it is." With a final wave, Nathan and Ursula were gone, the front door closing behind them with a definitive click that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet house. Margaret stood motionless in the kitchen, Ursula's earlier words ringing in her ears, like a maid who doesn't know when to leave. Was that truly how they saw her? Not as a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had built an empire from nothing and was now trying to build a legacy of love for her family, but as hired help who had overstepped her boundaries. Lily's small hand tugged at her sleeve. "Can we make the paper cranes now, Grandma?" Margaret looked down into her granddaughter's expectant face, so open, so untouched by the complexities of adult relationships, and felt her heart constrict with love and sorrow in equal measure. "Yes, sunshine," she said softly. "Let's make something beautiful together." But as she helped Lily clear the breakfast dishes, a decision was already forming in the back of Margaret's mind. Something had to change. She could not, would not, continue to exist on the periphery of her own family, tolerated rather than cherished. Vincent would have told her that she deserved better, and for the first time in 5 years, Margaret was beginning to believe it herself. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The paper cranes lay scattered across the kitchen table, a rainbow of delicate origami birds created during Margaret's morning with Lily. They had made 23 of them, each one a small triumph for Lily's developing fine motor skills. Margaret had been patient, guiding those tiny fingers through the folds, celebrating each completed crane with genuine delight. But now, with Lily safely delivered to preschool and the house empty, that feeling of delight had evaporated. Margaret moved through the rooms with new awareness, seeing things she had previously overlooked in her eagerness to be useful. The family photos on the mantel contained only a single image of her, a formal portrait from Nathan and Ursula's wedding, where she stood slightly apart from the main family grouping. The bookshelves held none of the volumes she had gifted them over the years. Even the kitchen, which she had helped design, had been subtly altered to erase her influence. The copper pots she had given them for their anniversary stored away, replaced by sleek stainless steel that better matched Ursula's aesthetic. Margaret paused in the doorway of Lily's bedroom, the only space in the house that still felt welcoming. Here, the evidence of her presence was everywhere: the handmade quilt on the bed, the illustrated storybooks they read together, the small wooden rocking chair that had once belonged to Nathan, restored by Margaret's own hands for her granddaughter. Lily, at least, seemed untouched by whatever resentment Ursula harbored. With a sigh, Margaret began tidying the room, picking up scattered toys and placing them in the colorful bins along the wall. She found one of Lily's drawings under the bed, a crayon creation depicting 3 figures, a small one in the middle holding hands with 2 larger ones on either side. "My family," Lily had written across the top in her wobbly kindergarten script. Margaret studied it, noting how the smallest figure was holding hands with the tallest one, labeled Grandma in Lily's distinctive handwriting, rather than the middle figure, presumably representing Ursula. Had Ursula seen this drawing? Was this part of what bothered her, the bond between grandmother and granddaughter, that sometimes seemed to eclipse the mother-daughter relationship? Margaret carefully placed the drawing on Lily's desk, then continued her tidying. As she worked, she found herself moving more slowly, taking in details she might have missed before. The teddy bear, whose arm she had sewn back on last month, the bookshelf she had assembled while Nathan and Ursula were away for a weekend, the small growth chart on the wall where she and Lily marked each new centimeter with a star sticker. She had poured so much of herself into this house, this family. And yet, according to Ursula, she was nothing more than a maid who doesn't know when to leave. The hurt crystallized into something harder, something that felt almost like determination. Margaret straightened, squaring her shoulders in the way she used to before entering difficult board meetings. She had not built Sullivan Enterprises by allowing herself to be diminished by others. Why was she accepting such treatment now? Margaret left Lily's room and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor where Nathan kept his home office. She rarely entered this space. It was his sanctuary and she respected his privacy, but today she needed to confirm something. The office was meticulously organized, architectural blueprints rolled neatly in a standing rack, awards from design, competitions displayed on floating shelves. Margaret went directly to the filing cabinet in the corner, opening the bottom drawer where she knew Nathan kept important family documents. The deed to the house was exactly where she expected it, to be filed under property. Margaret removed it, scanning the legal language until she found what she was looking for. Her own name listed as the sole owner of the property. When she had purchased the house, the market had been volatile, and her financial advisor had suggested keeping the deed in her name until things stabilized. Nathan had agreed readily enough, seeming almost relieved not to have to deal with the financial aspects of home ownership while his business was still growing. 3 years had passed, and the subject had never been raised again. Margaret had intended to transfer ownership to Nathan eventually. It was his home after all, but legal matters had a way of being forgotten in the day-to-day business of living. Now she found herself grateful for that oversight. She replaced the deed in the folder, closed the drawer, and descended back to the main floor. In the kitchen, she made herself a cup of tea, trying to sort through the tumult of emotions coursing through her. Anger, certainly, but also a profound sadness. How had it come to this? At what point had her loving presence become an unwelcome intrusion? The house phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Margaret hesitated, then answered, "Sullivan Residence." "Margaret, it's Joyce." Ursula's mother's voice came through the line, crisp and authoritative. Joyce Thompson was cut from the same cloth as her daughter, polished, privileged, and perpetually busy with charity committees and social engagements. "Is Ursula there?" "No, she's at work," Margaret replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Can I take a message? Just tell her I called about the country club fundraiser next weekend. She needs to confirm if you'll be watching Lily that evening, or if they need to make other arrangements." Margaret's grip on the phone tightened. So, it was assumed she would babysit, without anyone bothering to ask her directly. "I see. It's black tie, you know, very exclusive." The slight emphasis on exclusive told Margaret everything she needed to know about whether she should expect an invitation. Not that she would have accepted. Charity galas had never been her preferred social setting, even when Vincent was alive. "I'll let her know you called," Margaret said, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. "Thank you. Oh, and Margaret, Ursula mentioned you've been reorganizing her kitchen again. You might want to... Well, I know how particular she is about her things. She's always been that way, ever since she was a child." Joyce's laugh was light, almost conspiratorial, as if inviting Margaret to join in fond amusement at Ursula's quirks. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "Yes, she mentioned that. Thank you for the advice, Joyce." After ending the call, Margaret stood in the silent kitchen, staring at nothing. The casual way Joyce had delivered her message revealed so much about how Margaret was viewed by Ursula's family. As helpful when needed, but fundamentally separate. Not truly one of them, despite the shared grandchild that should have united them. Margaret glanced at the clock. It was nearly noon. She had planned to prepare a light lunch for when Lily returned from preschool at 1, then help her practice writing her name before Nathan and Ursula returned home around 6. A normal day in what had become her normal routine, but something had shifted inside her. The Margaret Sullivan, who had built a company from the ground up, who had navigated the male-dominated business world of 1970s Chicago through sheer determination and intelligence, would never have allowed herself to be treated this way. Somehow, in her grief over Vincent's death and her desire to remain connected to her only child, she had forgotten that fundamental truth about herself. Margaret picked up her purse from the counter and extracted a small leather-bound notebook, her constant companion throughout her business career. She flipped past pages of meeting notes and ideas, jotted down in her precise handwriting, until she found a blank page. There she began to write, bullet points forming a plan of action, just as she had done countless times when facing a business challenge. As the afternoon progressed, Margaret moved through her usual routine with Lily, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities, considering consequences, making decisions. By the time she heard Nathan and Ursula's key in the lock at 6:30, she had arrived at a resolution. "We're home," Nathan called, his footsteps heavy in the entryway. "Something smells amazing." Despite her earlier resolve not to cook dinner, Margaret had prepared a roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, Nathan's favorite meal, the one she had made for him on birthdays and special occasions throughout his childhood. One last act of maternal love before everything changed. "In the kitchen," she called back, helping Lily set the table with the good plates, the ones she had given them as a housewarming gift. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his expression surprised but pleased. "Mom, you didn't have to do this. I thought you'd be gone by now." "I wanted to," Margaret replied simply. "Lily helped with the potatoes, didn't you, sunshine?" Lily nodded proudly. "I put the herbs on, all by myself." Ursula entered behind Nathan, elegantly, disheveled after a day at her public relations firm. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the domestic scene before her. "This is 'cause unexpected," she said, setting down her designer handbag. "I thought we said not to worry about dinner." "Consider it my pleasure," Margaret replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's ready whenever you are." Dinner proceeded with a strained normalcy, Lily's chatter filling most of the silences. Nathan talked about a new commercial property he was designing, while Ursula mentioned a difficult client who had changed campaign strategies 3 times in 1 week. Margaret listened, asked appropriate questions, passed dishes, refilled water, glasses, all the while aware that this would be the last time she performed these small acts of service in this house. When the meal was finished and Lily had been excused to play for a few minutes before her bath, Margaret cleared her throat. "Nathan, Ursula, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." Just then, Ursula's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it. "Sorry, Margaret, can this wait? My mother needs me to call her back about the fundraiser next weekend." She turned to Nathan. "We need to figure out childcare. Your mother might not be available." Margaret felt, rather than saw, Nathan's eyes flick toward her, questioning. Before he could speak, she said, "Actually, I won't be available." Ursula paused, thumb hovering over her phone screen. "Oh, do you have plans?" "In a manner of speaking," Margaret replied, folding her napkin neatly and placing it beside her empty plate. "I won't be available next weekend, or for the foreseeable future, to watch Lily while you attend social functions." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's brow furrowed. "Mom, what are you talking about? Is everything okay?" Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw the boy she had raised, but also the man who had allowed his wife to speak of his mother as if she was staff rather than family. "No, Nathan, everything is not okay. I overheard Ursula this morning on the phone with someone. She referred to me as a maid who doesn't know when to leave." The color drained from Ursula's face. I didn't mean—" "Please don't insult my intelligence by denying it," Margaret said calmly. "I heard you quite clearly." Nathan's eyes darted between his mother and his wife. "Ursula, what is she talking about?" Ursula swallowed, her composure slipping. "It was just a passing comment to Diane. She was asking why we don't hire more household help, and I explained that we don't need to because your mother is always here, helping out." "By comparing me to hired help who has overstepped her boundaries?" Margaret's voice remained level, decades of boardroom negotiations having taught her the power of quiet control. "That's not fair," Ursula protested, though the flush creeping up her neck suggested otherwise. "You know how much we appreciate everything you do for us, for Lily—" "Stop!" Margaret held up a hand. "I didn't come here for apologies or explanations. I came to inform you of a decision I've made." She took a deep breath. "I will no longer be providing childcare for Lily on a regular basis. I love my granddaughter deeply, and I will continue to be part of her life, but on terms that respect my dignity and my time." Nathan leaned forward, his expression pained. "Mom, whatever Ursula said, I'm sure she didn't mean it the way it sounded. We rely on you. You know how hectic our schedules are." "And whose fault is that?" Margaret asked quietly. "I raised you while building a company, Nathan. I never used my career as an excuse to demand free labor from family members." Nathan flinched as if she had struck him. "That's not fair." "No, it isn't," Margaret agreed. None of this is fair. It isn't fair that I've poured my heart and resources into creating a foundation for your family, only to be treated as an inconvenience. It isn't fair that neither of you has ever asked me what I might need, what my own life might lack since your father died. Ursula's expression hardened. So this is emotional blackmail? You're punishing us because we don't pay enough attention to you. Margaret almost laughed at the absurdity of the accusation. No, Ursula. This is me recognizing my own worth and refusing to continue in a situation where I'm not valued. There's a difference. She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table between them. I've also made another decision. I'm selling this house. What does it mean to be taken for granted by the very people who should value you most? For Margaret, the realization was both devastating and strangely liberating, like finally naming an illness that had been silently consuming her from within. The looks of shocked betrayal on Nathan and Ursula's faces told her everything she needed to know about how deeply they had come to depend on her silent servitude, how completely they had forgotten that she was a person with needs and dignity of her own. As the impact of her words registered on their faces, Margaret knew there would be no going back to the way things had been, but she also knew, with the certainty that had guided her through decades of difficult decisions, that moving forward was her only choice. Ursula was the first to recover, her jaw tightening as her gaze fell on the envelope. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice catching slightly. "This is our home." "It's my property," Margaret corrected gently, no hint of triumph in her tone. "The deed has remained in my name these past 3 years. I've consulted with my attorney, and he confirms that I am fully within my rights to sell it." Nathan's face had gone ashen. "Mom, why are you doing this?" "If this is about what Ursula said—" "It's not just about what she said," Margaret interrupted. "It's about what you didn't say. How many times have you heard your wife speak dismissively of me and chosen to remain silent? How many times have you allowed me to be treated as less than family in this house that I provided for you?" The truth hit him like a physical blow. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the flicker of shame that crossed his face before he mastered. "That's not fair," he repeated, but his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Life rarely is," Margaret said, rising from her chair. "I'm not doing this to punish you, Nathan. I'm doing it because I've finally remembered who I am, who I've always been. I won't be diminished, not even by those I love most." As if on cue, Lily came bounding back into the dining room, clutching a drawing she had just completed. "Look, Grandma, I made us at the park." She thrust the paper toward Margaret, who took it with hands that trembled only slightly. The crayon illustration showed 4 stick figures, Lily in the center, holding hands with a taller figure labeled Grandma, while 2 other figures stood slightly apart. Margaret felt her heart constrict at the innocent perception that so accurately reflected the reality of their family dynamic. "It's beautiful, Sunshine," she said, kneeling to embrace her granddaughter. "May I keep it?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I made it for you to put on your refrigerator like you do with all my pictures." Margaret glanced up to find Nathan watching them, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he began, his voice low. "Please, can we discuss this rationally? You can't just walk away from everything we've built here." "What exactly have you built, Nathan?" Margaret asked, still holding Lily close. "A life where your mother is welcome only when she's serving a purpose. A home where she's spoken of as staff rather than family?" "That's not true," Ursula protested. "You're twisting everything." "Lily, sweetheart," Margaret said, turning her attention back to her granddaughter. "Why don't you go upstairs and pick out a bedtime story? I'll be up in a little while to say goodnight." Once Lily had scampered off, Margaret straightened, smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. "I've already listed the house with a realtor. She'll be contacting you to arrange viewings. I've instructed her to give you first option to purchase it yourselves at market value." Ursula let out a disbelieving laugh. "You expect us to buy our own home from you? After everything we've done for you?" Margaret regarded her daughter-in-law steadily. "Everything you've done for me? Please enlighten me. What exactly have you done for me these past 5 years, other than allow me the privilege of providing free childcare, household help and financial support?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Ursula's mouth opened and closed, But no words emerged. Nathan looked away, unable to meet his mother's gaze. "I thought so," Margaret said softly. "I'll be taking my leave now. You can reach me on my cell phone if needed." She gathered her purse and the drawing Lily had given her. "Please tell Lily I had to go, but that I'll see her soon." "Where exactly do you think you're going?" Ursula's voice had taken on a sharp edge. "You need us, Margaret. You've been lost since Vincent died. Your whole life revolves around this family now." For the first time that evening, Margaret smiled genuinely. "That's where you're wrong, Ursula. I have a life beyond these walls. One that I've neglected for too long while trying to fill the void Vincent left by making myself indispensable to you. I'm going home, to my penthouse downtown, the one I kept when I bought this house for you, the one neither of you has ever bothered to visit." Nathan stood abruptly. "Mom, wait, you can't just drop this bomb and walk out. We need to talk about this like adults." "I agree," Margaret said, her hand already on the dining room doorknob. "But not tonight. Tonight, I need space and time to think. I suggest you both do the same." As she made her way to the front door, she could hear them behind her, Nathan's heavy footsteps, Ursula's urgent whispers. She paused only to collect her coat from the hall closet, slipping it on with deliberate calm. "Mom!" Nathan's voice stopped her just as she was reaching for the door handle. "Please, don't do this." Margaret turned to face her son one last time. In his eyes, she saw fear, not just of losing the house, but of losing her, of having to confront the reality that he had allowed his mother to be diminished in his own home. "I'm not doing anything to you, Nathan. I'm doing something for myself. There's a difference." And with that, she stepped out into the cool Chicago evening, closing the door firmly behind her. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for months, years perhaps, seemed to lift with each step she took down the front path. By the time she reached her car, the sleek silver Mercedes that had been her one concession to luxury after Vincent's death, she felt lighter than she had in years. She slid behind the wheel, placing Lily's drawing carefully on the passenger seat. Only then did she allow herself a moment of vulnerability, a single tear sliding down her cheek before she wiped it away with determined fingers. She would not cry for what she had lost, not tonight. Tonight was about what she had reclaimed, her dignity, her independence, her sense of self. As she drove through the familiar streets toward downtown, toward the elegant penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan that she had shared with Vincent for 2 decades before his death, Margaret realized that she was not, as Ursula had implied, a lonely old woman with nothing in her life but family obligations. She was Margaret Sullivan, former CEO of Sullivan Enterprises, widow of Vincent Sullivan, mother to Nathan, grandmother to Lily, a complete person in her own right, with a life still very much worth living. And it was high time she remembered that. The dramatic confrontation left an aftermath that rippled through the following days like aftershocks from an earthquake. Nathan called 17 times in the first 24 hours, messages that ranged from anger to pleading, accusations to apologies. Margaret listened to each one, her heart aching but her resolve unshaken. She responded with a single text message. "I need time. Please respect that." Ursula, predictably, took a different approach. An email arrived the following afternoon, its tone professionally cordial, as if addressing a difficult client rather than family. She acknowledged that her comment had been unfortunate and poorly phrased, but suggested that Margaret was overreacting in a way that could permanently damage her relationship with Lily. The thinly veiled threat that access to her granddaughter might be restricted if Margaret proceeded with her plans was not lost on her. Margaret forwarded the email to her attorney without comment. By day 3, Joyce Thompson had entered the fray, leaving a scathing voicemail that managed to both criticize Margaret's selfish behavior and condescendingly suggest that perhaps she was experiencing some delayed grief reaction that required professional help. Margaret deleted it without responding. What surprised her most, however, was the profound sense of peace that descended once she had made her decision. For 3 years, 5 really, since Vincent's death, she had oriented her life around Nathan's family, believing that was what she needed, what they needed. Now, as she moved through her penthouse, rediscovering spaces and objects that had been neglected during her frequent absences, she felt like she was rediscovering herself as well. The penthouse was exactly as Vincent had left it. His reading glasses still on the side table next to his favorite armchair, his collection of first-edition mystery novels still arranged alphabetically on the shelves, his monogrammed robe still hanging on the back of the bathroom door. Margaret had never had the heart to change anything after his death, preferring instead to spend her time at Nathan's house, avoiding the echoing loneliness of the space they had shared. Now she found herself touching these remnants of her husband with newfound tenderness. On the fourth morning after her departure from Nathan's house, she finally removed the robe from its hook, burying her face in the soft fabric that no longer held his scent. "I think I've been doing this all wrong, Vincent," she whispered to the empty room. "I thought I needed to pour myself into Nathan's life to keep you close, but all I've done is lose myself in the process." That afternoon, Margaret did something she hadn't done since before Vincent's death. She called Patricia Rollins, her former executive assistant and friend of 30 years. Patricia's delighted surprise at hearing her voice made Margaret realize how completely she had withdrawn from her own social circle. "Margaret Sullivan, where on earth have you been hiding?" Patricia's warm voice carried through the phone. "The museum board has been asking about you for months. No one seems to know what happened to the woman who used to run this city. They agreed to meet for lunch the following day at Claudine's, an elegant bistro they had frequented during their working years. As Margaret dressed for the occasion, selecting a tailored navy suit she hadn't worn in years, she caught her reflection in the bedroom mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman who had led board meetings and negotiated million-dollar contracts had been replaced by someone who had made herself smaller to fit into the corners of her son's life. "No more," she told her reflection firmly. Lunch with Patricia proved to be exactly what Margaret needed, a reminder that she had friendships, connections, and respect that existed independently of her role as Nathan's mother or Lily's grandmother. Patricia updated her on mutual acquaintances, business developments, and community projects that had once been central to Margaret's life. "The hospital wing you funded is finally opening next month," Patricia informed her over dessert. "They've been trying to reach you for the ribbon-cutting ceremony." Margaret frowned. "I haven't received any invitations." Patricia's expression turned knowing. "They've been sending them to Nathan's address. He told them you were staying there most of the time." The revelation landed like a stone in Margaret's stomach. How much of her life had been redirected through Nathan without her knowledge? How completely had she allowed herself to be erased? "Well," she said, straightening her shoulders, "they can send future correspondence directly to my penthouse. I'm home to stay." Over the following week, Margaret systematically reconnected with the life she had abandoned. She called the hospital board and confirmed her attendance at the wing dedication. She reached out to former business associates who had been trying to involve her in mentorship programs for female entrepreneurs. She even contacted her travel agent to inquire about a trip to Provence, something she and Vincent had always planned to do in their retirement. What she didn't do was contact Nathan or Ursula, though her heart ached for Lily with an intensity that sometimes took her breath away. She knew that her granddaughter would be confused by her sudden absence, and the thought of Lily believing she had been abandoned made Margaret physically ill. But she also knew that rushing back at the first pang of guilt would only reinforce the dysfunctional patterns she was trying to break. On the 10th day of her self-imposed exile, the doorbell rang. Margaret opened it to find Helen Santiago, her neighbor from 3 doors down, standing in the hallway with a familiar small figure half hidden behind her. "Lily!" Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her heart. Helen smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry to surprise you like this, Margaret. Nathan called me. He said Lily has been inconsolable since you left, and they thought perhaps seeing you might help. I agreed to bring her over since, well, I gathered there's some tension between you and your daughter-in-law." Lily peered around Helen's leg, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Grandma? Are you mad at me? Is that why you went away?" Margaret dropped to her knees, arms outstretched. "Oh, sunshine, no, never. I could never be mad at you." Lily flung herself into Margaret's embrace with such force that both of them nearly toppled over. The little girl buried her face in her grandmother's neck, small body shaking with the force of her sobs. "I miss you so much," she hiccuped. "Daddy says you're having a time out, but I don't know what you did wrong." Margaret met Helen's eyes over Lily's head, silently communicating her gratitude. Helen nodded in understanding. "I told Nathan I'd bring her back by dinner time," she said. "That gives you about 3 hours." After Helen departed, Margaret took Lily into the living room, settling with her on the sofa that overlooked the spectacular view of Lake Michigan. Lily curled against her side, still sniffling occasionally. "Your home is pretty," she said, looking around with the natural curiosity of a child. "How come we never came here before?" The innocent question pierced Margaret's heart. "I don't know, Sunshine. I should have invited you long ago. Can I see your bedroom? Does it have a canopy bed like in the princess books?" Margaret smiled. "It doesn't, I'm afraid. But I do have something special to show you." She led Lily through the penthouse, pointing out objects of interest. Vincent's collection of glass paperweights that caught the light in kaleidoscopic patterns, the antique globe that could be illuminated from within, the wall of photographs, documenting Margaret and Vincent's life together. Lily was particularly fascinated by the pictures of Nathan as a child. "Daddy was little once? Like me?" she asked, peering at a photograph of a 10-year-old Nathan grinning from the branch of an apple tree. "Just like you," Margaret confirmed. "That was taken at our summer house in Michigan. Your daddy loved climbing that old tree." "Can we go there? To the summer house?" Margaret hesitated. The lakeside cottage had been sold shortly after Vincent's death, another piece of her past discarded in the fog of grief. "Not to that one, sweetheart. But perhaps we could find a new special place, just for us." They spent the afternoon baking cookies in Margaret's rarely used kitchen, filling the penthouse with the comforting scent of vanilla and chocolate. Margaret showed Lily how to operate the fancy stand mixer that had been a gift from Vincent on their last anniversary. "For when you finally have time to explore that culinary school dream," he had said, always more attentive to her secret aspirations than she had given him credit for. As they worked side by side, flour dusting their cheeks, Margaret felt a certainty settle over her. She would not, could not, lose this relationship, no matter what transpired between her and Nathan, between her and Ursula. Lily was the innocent, heart at the center of this family storm, and Margaret would move heaven and earth to ensure she didn't suffer for the mistakes of the adults around her. When Helen returned at the appointed time, Lily clutched Margaret's hand tightly. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "Can't I stay with you?" Margaret knelt to meet her granddaughter's eyes. "Not today, Sunshine, but I promise you this. I will always be your grandmother no matter where I live, and we will always have special time together." She sent Lily home with a container of cookies for Nathan and Ursula and a handwritten note requesting a meeting to discuss a visitation schedule. It was an olive branch of sorts, though not a surrender. That evening, as Margaret sat alone in her living room, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson, her cell phone chimed with a text message from Nathan. "Thank you for the cookies. Can we talk tomorrow, my office noon, just the two of us?" Margaret stared at the message for a long moment before typing her response. "I'll be there." The following day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect Chicago autumn morning. Margaret dressed, with care, selecting a deep burgundy suit that had always made her feel confident. As she fastened her pearl earrings, Vincent's gift on their 25th anniversary, she studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed more like the Margaret Sullivan of old, determined, dignified, unwilling to accept less than she deserved. Nathan's architectural firm occupied the 12th floor of a sleek glass tower in the business district. As Margaret stepped off the elevator, she was struck by how little she knew about her son's professional life. She had provided the seed money for him to start the firm after he completed his architecture degree, but she had never visited these offices, never met his colleagues, never seen the tangible fruits of his creative labor. The receptionist, a young man with fashionably tousled hair and horn-rimmed glasses, greeted her with a bright smile. "Mrs. Sullivan, Nathan said to expect you. Please go right in. Last door on the left." She thanked him, and made her way down the corridor, pausing to examine the framed blueprints and photographs of completed projects that lined the walls. Nathan's talent was evident in each design, a perfect blend of function and artistry that had always been his hallmark, even in the elaborate Lego structures he had built as a child. Nathan was standing at the window when she entered his office, hands clasped behind his back in a posture so reminiscent of Vincent that Margaret's breath caught. He turned at the sound of the door, his expression a complex mixture of wariness and hope. "Mom," he said simply, "thank you for coming." "Your work is impressive," she replied, gesturing toward the corridor. "You've built something remarkable here." A flash of pride crossed his features before uncertainty reclaimed them. "Please sit down." He indicated a small seating area in the corner of the office, two sleek leather armchairs separated by a glass coffee table. Once they were seated, an awkward silence fell between them. Margaret waited, having learned long ago the power of silence in negotiations. Finally, Nathan cleared his throat. "I've spoken with a mortgage broker," he began. "Ursula and I can secure financing to purchase the house from you at market value, as you suggested." Margaret nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I see. But that's not why I asked you here." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom, I owe you an apology, not just for what Ursula said, but for what I didn't say. For all the times I let her diminish your role in our lives because it was easier than confronting the issue." The simple acknowledgement loosened something in Margaret's chest. "Thank you for recognizing that. I've been thinking about why I did that, why I allowed it to happen." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he had carried from childhood. "I think part of me resented how much we needed you after Lily was born. Not the help itself, but the fact that we needed it at all. Dad always said that true independence was the greatest gift a parent could give a child, and there I was in my 30s, still relying on my mother to hold my life together." Margaret considered this. "Independence doesn't mean refusing help. When it's offered freely, Nathan, it means being able to stand on your own when necessary. I know that now, or I'm starting to understand it at least." He met her gaze directly. "I don't want to lose you, Mom. Neither does Lily. These past days have been eye-opening. I never realized how completely we'd come to depend on your presence until it was gone." "And Ursula?" Margaret asked quietly. "How does she feel about all this?" Nathan's hesitation spoke volumes. "She's struggling. With guilt, with pride, with the practical realities of managing without you. But she knows she was wrong, we both were." Margaret nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty and your apology, but Nathan, I need you to understand something. I won't go back to the way things were. I can't." "I wouldn't ask you to," he said, quickly. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss. I've been thinking about alternative arrangements that might work for everyone." He reached for a folder on the coffee table and opened it to reveal architectural drawings, a familiar structure, with significant modifications. "This is our house, your house," he corrected himself, "with an addition. A separate apartment over the garage with its own entrance, kitchen, and living space, connected to the main house but independent." Margaret studied the drawings, understanding dawning. "You're proposing a compromise. Yes, you sell us the house as planned, but we use part of your garden, the section by the old oak tree, to build this addition for you, a place that's yours, where you have privacy and independence, but where you can still be close to Lily." He turned a page to show detailed renderings of the interior. "I designed it with you in mind. The south-facing windows for your reading nook, plenty of built-in bookshelves, a kitchenette that's functional but not overwhelming, since I know you don't cook much for yourself." Margaret was touched by the thought that had gone into the design, by the evidence that her son knew her better than she had given him credit for. "It's beautiful work, Nathan. There's more." He hesitated. "I know that money isn't the issue here. It's respect, dignity, being valued for who you are, not just what you can do for us." He took a deep breath. "So my proposal includes a formal agreement about childcare. You'll have set days and times when you watch Lily if you want to, But it will be your choice, not our expectation. And Ursula and I will pay you for those hours, not because we think of you as hired help, but because your time has value." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You want to pay me to spend time with my granddaughter?" "No." Nathan shook his head firmly. "I want to acknowledge that your time is precious, and that when you choose to give it to us, it's a gift we should honor, not take for granted. The money is symbolic, Mom. Put it in a college fund for Lily if you want. The point is to formalize boundaries that we've all been terrible at maintaining." Margaret considered the proposal, turning it over in her mind. It was, on the surface, an elegant solution, a physical manifestation of the emotional boundaries she had been trying to establish, but she wasn't entirely convinced. "And what does Ursula think of this plan?" Nathan's expression turned rueful. She wasn't thrilled initially. The idea of having her mother-in-law living on the property, even in a separate space, wasn't exactly her dream scenario. But Lily's distress these past days has been illuminating for her, and the practical reality of managing work and childcare without you has been challenging. She's coming around. Margaret nodded slowly. "I'll need some time to think about this, Nathan. It's not a decision I can make on the spot." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever you decide about the living situation, I want you to know that I hear you. About the larger issues, about how we've treated you. Things will be different going forward, regardless of where you live." She studied, her son's face looking for signs of the boy she had raised, the child who had once declared with absolute certainty that he would build her a house on the moon when he grew up, so she could see all the stars up close. That innocent devotion had been tempered by time and circumstance, by the complicated reality of adult relationships, but perhaps it wasn't entirely gone. "I believe you mean that now," she said carefully. "But intentions and actions don't always align, especially when old patterns are so deeply ingrained. Then we'll work on changing those patterns." Nathan leaned forward, earnestness in every line of his face. "Mum, I almost lost you because I forgot to see you, really see you. I won't make that mistake again." The conviction in his voice touched something in Margaret, a tentative hope that perhaps not everything was broken beyond repair. "I'll think about your proposal," she promised, "and in the meantime, perhaps we could arrange regular visits with Lily? Neutral territory like the park or the Children's Museum." "Absolutely." The relief in Nathan's voice was palpable. She would love that. We all would. As Margaret left her son's office, the autumn sun warm on her face, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not because all the problems had been solved, they hadn't, but because for the first time since Vincent's death, she was making choices based on what she needed, what she deserved, rather than contorting herself to fill the gaps in others' lives. She had offered to help, yes, but now she understood that true help, the kind that lifted everyone up rather than diminishing anyone, required honesty, boundaries, and mutual respect. Perhaps in time, they could build something new together, something healthier than what had come before. As she walked toward the lake, Margaret found herself wondering what Vincent would make of all this. She could almost hear his gentle laughter, could almost feel the reassuring pressure of his hand on the small of her back. "That's my Maggie," he would have said, always finding a way through. For the first time in 5 years, the memory brought more comfort than pain. Vincent was gone, but she remained, stronger than she had given herself credit for, more resilient than anyone had expected. Whatever came next, whether she accepted Nathan's architectural compromise or found another path entirely, she would face it on her own terms, with the dignity and self-respect she had temporarily misplaced, but never truly lost. Margaret Sullivan had offered to help, but now she understood. The person most in need of her help, her wisdom, her care, had been herself all along. Have you ever known someone who was taken for granted by family members who should have valued them more? Let me know in the comments if this resonates with your own experiences. 2 days after her meeting with Nathan, Margaret received an unexpected visitor at her penthouse. The doorman called up shortly before noon. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's a Mrs. Thompson here to see you. Should I send her up?" Margaret's first instinct was to refuse. Her relationship with Joyce Thompson had always been cordial at best, strained at worst. But curiosity got the better of her. Yes, send her up. Joyce arrived looking every inch the Chicago society matron she was, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, diamond studs winking from her earlobes, her silver blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. But there was something unusual in her expression, hint of uncertainty that Margaret had never seen before. "Joyce?" Margaret greeted her, stepping aside to allow her entry. "This is unexpected." "I know." Joyce moved past her into the foyer, glancing around with poorly disguised curiosity. "I've never been to your home before. It's not what I expected." Margaret led her into the living room. "What were you expecting? Doilies and cat figurines?" Joyce had the grace to look embarrassed. "Something less magnificent, perhaps." "This view is spectacular." "Vincent had an eye for real estate," Margaret said simply. "Would you like some tea?" Once they were settled with teacups and a plate of shortbread, Joyce came to the point with characteristic directness. "Ursula is struggling," she announced, setting her cup down with a delicate clink. "Between her job and managing Lily without your help, she's exhausted, and Nathan is distant, preoccupied with this renovation idea of his." Margaret kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." Joyce's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks rather like revenge." "Then you're sitting in the wrong place," Margaret replied evenly. "This isn't about revenge, Joyce. It's about self-respect." "Self-respect," Joyce repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar word. "Is that what you call tearing apart a family over a careless comment?" Margaret set her own cup down, folding her hands in her lap. "Is that what Ursula told you? That this is about one careless comment?" For the first time, Joyce looked uncertain. "She said you overheard her referring to you as, well, in less than flattering terms, and that you've blown it out of proportion." "I see." Margaret studied Joyce thoughtfully. "Did she also mention that it was part of a pattern? That she has consistently treated me as an employee rather than family? That Nathan has allowed it to happen? That in 5 years, neither of them has once asked me about my own life, my own needs?" Joyce shifted uncomfortably. "Ursula can be focused on her own concerns. It's how she was raised, I suppose." She glanced around the elegant room again. "But she doesn't mean harm by it." "Intent and impact are different things," Margaret said quietly. "And the impact of being treated as less than for years has taken its toll." Something in Joyce's expression changed. A flicker of recognition, perhaps understanding. "I may know something about that," she admitted reluctantly. "Harold's family never quite accepted me, you know. Too nouveau riche for their old Chicago blood. Even after 40 years, I'm still the outsider at family gatherings." It was the most personal thing Joyce had ever shared with her, and Margaret felt a surprising connection with this woman she had always held at arm's length. "That must have been difficult." Joyce waved a dismissive hand, but her eyes told a different story. "One adapts, but I didn't come here to discuss ancient history. I came because whatever has transpired between you and Ursula, Lily is suffering. She misses you terribly." "I miss her too," Margaret said softly. "Nathan and I are arranging regular visits while we figure out a longer-term solution." Joyce nodded briskly. "Yes, he mentioned his renovation plans. It's an interesting proposition, but not one you approve of." "It doesn't matter what I approve of." Joyce surprised her by reaching across the coffee table to touch Margaret's hand briefly. "What matters is what works for all of you, including you, Margaret. I can see now that perhaps we've all been taking your contributions for granted." The admission coming from this proud woman struck Margaret deeply. "Thank you for saying that." Joyce straightened, resuming her usual brisk manner. "Well, I should be going. I've said what I came to say." As she showed Joyce to the door, Margaret was struck by an impulse. "Joyce, would you like to join me for lunch at Claudine's next week? There's an opening at the Children's Hospital that I'm involved with. You might find it interesting." Joyce looked genuinely startled, then thoughtful. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thursday?" "Thursday is perfect." After Joyce left, Margaret stood at her living room window, watching the play of sunlight on the lake. Something had shifted during that strange, unexpected conversation, not just between her and Joyce, but within herself. She was beginning to see possibilities she hadn't considered before, connections that might be built or rebuilt on new, more equal foundations. That evening, she called Nathan. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she told him. "I'd like to discuss some modifications." 2 months later, on a crisp December afternoon, Margaret stood in the garden of the brownstone, watching as construction workers framed the walls of what would become her new living space. The design had evolved significantly since Nathan's initial proposal. Instead of an apartment over the garage, they had decided to convert the garage itself into a freestanding cottage, a true tiny home with its own garden plot, separate from the main house but connected by a stone pathway. The financial arrangements had changed as well. Rather than selling the house outright, Margaret had transferred it into a family trust, with provisions that protected both her interests and Nathan and Ursula's. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was one they had crafted together, with the help of family counseling sessions that had revealed hurts and expectations on all sides that had gone unaddressed for too long. "What do you think, Grandma? Will your reading chair fit by that window?" Lily piped up beside her, pointing to what would soon be the cottage's bay window overlooking a magnolia tree that would bloom magnificently in spring. "I think it will." "Be perfect, Sunshine," Margaret replied, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. Ursula appeared in the garden doorway carrying a tray with mugs of hot chocolate. "Construction meeting fuel," she announced, setting the tray on a nearby patio table. The relationship between the two women remained a work in progress, sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly warm, always more honest than it had been before. "Thank you," Margaret said, accepting a mug. "Is Nathan on his way?" Ursula nodded. "Running late as usual, client meeting." She hesitated, then added, "I wanted to ask you something, actually. My book club is reading that biography of Eleanor Roosevelt next month, the one you mentioned. I wondered if you might want to join us for the discussion. Several of the women are former executives like you. I think you'd find the conversation interesting." The invitation was casual, but Margaret recognized it for what it was, an olive branch, an acknowledgement, a step toward something new. "I'd like that," she said simply. As the winter light began to fade, casting long shadows across the garden, Nathan finally arrived, looking harried but pleased with himself. "Sorry I'm late, but I have news. The Children's Museum loved our proposal for the new interactive architecture exhibit. They want us to move forward with it right away." "That's wonderful," Margaret exclaimed. "When does development start?" "January. And that's the other news," Nathan said, glancing between his mother and his wife. "They specifically requested that we include an educational component for the exhibit, something about the business side of architecture, making it accessible for kids. And I immediately thought of you, Mom. Your experience would be perfect for this." Margaret blinked in surprise. "Me?" "It would be a consulting position, part-time," Nathan continued. "But I think you'd enjoy it. Getting back into the business world, even in this small way, using your expertise." For a moment, Margaret couldn't speak. It wasn't just the offer itself that moved her. It was the recognition behind it. Nathan wasn't seeing her merely as a grandmother, a caretaker, but as the businesswoman she had always been, the professional with skills and knowledge still valuable in the world. "I'd need to hear more details," she said finally. "But yes, I'm interested." Lily tugged at her hand. "Does this mean you'll be working with Daddy, like a real job?" Margaret crouched down to her granddaughter's level. "It would be a real job. Sunshine, but don't worry, I'll still have plenty of time for you. We'll make sure of it." "You promise?" Lily asked, solemn-eyed. "I promise." Margaret looked up to find Nathan and Ursula watching them, and she suddenly understood that this moment, this family, these relationships, was what she had been trying to preserve all along. Not the surface appearance of harmony, but the deeper bonds that could withstand honesty, conflict, and change. As the four of them stood together in the twilight, watching the framework of Margaret's new home take shape, she felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her. The path forward wasn't clear or simple, but it was there waiting to be walked together. She had offered to help, yes, but now they were all learning what true help looked like, not self-erasure or silent servitude, but authentic presence, honest communication, and mutual respect. For Margaret Sullivan, former CEO, widow, mother, and grandmother, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write on her own terms, surrounded by a family that was learning at last to see her for all that she was. The winter gave way to spring, and with it came the completion of Margaret's cottage. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, the magnolia tree outside her window bursting into magnificent bloom just as she moved in her carefully selected furniture, a mix of treasured pieces from the penthouse and new items chosen specifically for this space. Standing in her new kitchen, compact but beautifully designed with the high-end appliances she had always appreciated, Margaret felt a sense of rightness that had been missing for too long. This space was unmistakably hers, the walls painted in the soft sage green she preferred, the bookshelves filled with her collection of business biographies and mystery novels, the reading nook positioned to capture both the morning light and a view of Lily's swing set in the distance. "Well, Vincent," she said to the framed photograph on her bedside table, "what do you think of our new adventure?" In the months since her dramatic departure from Nathan and Ursula's home, much had changed. The weekly family counseling sessions had been challenging but revelatory, bringing to light patterns and assumptions that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Nathan had confronted his own tendency to avoid conflict at all costs, a trait he had developed in childhood, as a response to his parents' occasional heated disagreements. Ursula had acknowledged her resentment of Margaret's influence over Nathan and Lily, born partly from her own complicated relationship with Joyce, and Margaret had recognized her tendency to offer help as a way of maintaining control, a business strategy that had served her well professionally but created unhealthy dynamics in her personal relationships. None of these revelations had been easy to face, but they had cleared the way for something more authentic to grow in the place of performative harmony. The consulting position with Nathan's firm had evolved into something more substantial, a part-time role advising on the business operations of both the Children's Museum project and the firm itself. Margaret found herself looking forward to the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons she spent at the office, her business acumen valued and her experience respected in ways that had nothing to do with family obligation. Her relationship with Ursula remained the most complex, but there too progress was evident. The book club invitation had led to others, a charity auction committee, a gallery opening, and Margaret was beginning to see qualities in her daughter-in-law that she had previously overlooked: a sharp intelligence, a wry sense of humor, a genuine dedication to her public relations clients that mirrored Margaret's own professional ethic. Most surprising of all had been the developing friendship between Margaret and Joyce. Their lunch at Claudine's had led to a regular monthly meeting, sometimes joined by other women their age, sometimes just the two of them. They discovered a shared interest in healthcare philanthropy and together had launched a new initiative to support nursing education at the hospital where Margaret's wing had been dedicated. "We could have been friends years ago if either of us had made the effort," Joyce remarked during one of these lunches. "Think of all the time we wasted circling each other like suspicious cats." Margaret had laughed, recognizing the truth in the observation. "We were too busy seeing each other as competition rather than allies." For what prize? The title of most influential mother-in-law? Joyce had shaken her head ruefully. How foolish we were. But the most profound change had been in Margaret's relationship with Lily. Free from the underlying tensions that had pervaded the household before, their time together now had a quality of focused attention that made every moment more meaningful. Margaret still cared for Lily 3 afternoons a week, but now it was by mutual agreement, scheduled in advance, and approached with intention rather than obligation. "Grandma, can we plant flowers in your garden today?" Lily asked one sunny April afternoon, bouncing on the balls of her feet as she stood in the doorway of the cottage. "Mommy said we could if it's okay with you." "I think that's a wonderful idea, Sunshine," Margaret replied, setting aside the quarterly report she had been reviewing. "I have some seeds we can plant, and we could go to the garden center to pick out some already growing flowers too." As they worked together in the small garden plot outside Margaret's cottage, Margaret was struck by how naturally Lily chatted now, sharing details about school and friends without the watchful hesitation that had sometimes characterized their interactions before. "Mummy says you're coming on our vacation this summer," Lily announced, patting soil carefully around a marigold seedling. "Yes, for part of it," Margaret confirmed. "I'll join you at the lake house for the second week." "It was Mommy's idea," Lily said earnestly. "She told Daddy that you could have the blue bedroom with the best view." The revelation surprised Margaret. The summer vacation plans had been presented to her by Nathan, with the clear implication that it had been his suggestion. The fact that Ursula had initiated the invitation and specifically requested that Margaret have the most desirable guest room spoke volumes about how far they had come. That evening, Margaret invited Nathan, Ursula, and Lily to dinner at the cottage, the first formal meal she had hosted in her new space. She prepared Vincent's famous pasta primavera, a recipe she had rediscovered in one of his old notebooks, and Lily proudly carried the salad she had helped assemble from the cottage to the small dining table Margaret had positioned under the window. As they sat together, sharing the meal and conversation that flowed more easily now, Margaret looked around at these people who constituted her family. Imperfect, sometimes difficult, but hers nonetheless. Nathan caught her eye across the table and smiled, a private moment of understanding passing between mother and son. Later, after Lily had been tucked into bed and Nathan and Ursula had returned to the main house, Margaret sat in her reading chair with a glass of wine, contemplating the day. Her phone chimed with a text from Ursula. "Dinner was lovely, thank you. Lily wants to know if you're still on for the Science Museum tomorrow. She says it has to be you because Grandma knows. All the best space facts." Margaret smiled, typing her reply. "Wouldn't miss it. Pick you both up at 10? The response came swiftly. "Perfect, and Margaret, thank you for everything." The simple acknowledgement, so long desired, so freely given now, warmed Margaret more than the wine ever could. She set her glass aside and walked to the window, looking out at the main house where lights still glowed in the upstairs windows. In the garden between the two structures, Lily's newly planted flowers caught the moonlight, promising beauty in the days to come. Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her here, not just the dramatic confrontation and its aftermath, but the longer path of grief and loss and rediscovery that had begun with Vincent's death. She had lost her way for a time, seeking purpose in servitude rather than genuine connection. But now, standing in this space that was entirely her own, while still connected to those she loved, she understood that true family bonds could withstand honesty, change, and the setting of boundaries. She had offered to help, yes, but in reclaiming her dignity, in refusing to be diminished, she had ultimately helped them all, teaching Nathan about respect, Ursula about gratitude, Lily about the strength that comes from valuing oneself. And perhaps most importantly, she had helped herself remember who she had always been, not just a mother, a grandmother, a widow, but Margaret Sullivan, complete and whole on her own terms. As spring turned to summer, and summer to fall, the new patterns of their family life solidified into something that felt both structured and flexible, guided by mutual respect rather than unspoken expectations. There were still difficult moments, still adjustments to be made, but the foundation had been rebuilt, stronger now for having acknowledged its cracks. One crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after Margaret had overheard those fateful words in the hallway, she hosted a dinner party in her cottage. Joyce and Harold, Nathan and Ursula, Patricia and her husband, and several colleagues. From the Children's Museum project, Lily had been allowed to stay up late enough to enjoy dessert before being tucked into bed in the main house with a special story from her grandmother. As Margaret moved among her guests, refilling wine glasses and encouraging conversation between people from different parts of her life, she caught Nathan watching her with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked, pausing beside him. "I was just thinking about how different things were a year ago," he said quietly. "How close we came to losing all of this." Margaret nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Sometimes we need to break before we can rebuild properly." "I'm glad you didn't let us off the hook," Nathan admitted. "It would have been easier in the moment if you had just let it go, pretended not to hear, gone back to the way things were. Easier, perhaps, Margaret agreed, but not better. Not in the long run. From across the room Ursula approached, her expression warm as she joined their conversation. Your colleague Diane was just telling me about the expansion plans for the Children's Museum project. It sounds like they want to increase your role. They've offered me a position on the board, Margaret confirmed. Educational outreach, focusing on introducing young girls to business concepts. I'm considering it. You should accept, Ursula said without hesitation. You'd be perfect for it. The simple vote of confidence delivered without calculation or hidden agenda meant more to Margaret than Ursula could possibly know. Thank you, I think I will. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Joyce lingered, helping Margaret gather dessert plates despite Margaret's protests that she could handle the clean-up in the morning. I've been meaning to ask you, Joyce said as they worked, side by side in the compact kitchen. Harold and I are planning a trip to Provence in the spring. I remember you mentioning that you and Vincent always wanted to go. Would you consider joining us for part of it? There's a cooking school in Aix that's supposed to be marvelous. The invitation caught Margaret by surprise. I'd like that very much, she said, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the offer. After the last guest had departed, Margaret stepped outside to enjoy the crisp autumn air. The path between her cottage and the main house was lit by small solar lamps that Nathan had installed, creating a welcoming glow that symbolized the connection between the two spaces, separate but linked, independent but united. From her vantage point, she could see into the brightly lit kitchen of the main house, where Nathan and Ursula were moving in their own domestic choreography, putting away leftovers, laughing over something Margaret couldn't hear. The sight filled her with a quiet joy rather than the painful exclusion she might have felt a year ago. Her phone chimed with a text message. It was from Patricia. Wonderful evening. So good to see you in your element again, Margaret. Vincent. Would be proud. Margaret smiled, knowing it was true. Vincent had always encouraged her independence, her strength, her unwillingness to be diminished. He would indeed be proud of the woman who had emerged from the fog of grief to reclaim herself. As if summoned by her thoughts, the back door of the main house opened, and Nathan stepped out, crossing the garden toward her. "Everything okay?" she asked as he approached. "Perfect," he assured her. "I just wanted to give you this before I forgot." He handed her a small flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. "I found it when we were cleaning out the attic last weekend. I thought you should have it." Curious, Margaret unwrapped the package to reveal a framed photograph she had never seen before. Vincent sitting at their old kitchen table, head thrown back in laughter, their cat perched indignantly on his shoulder. She was visible in the background, younger, focused on something at the counter, unaware of the camera. "I don't remember this," she said softly. "Dad took a lot of pictures of you when you weren't looking," Nathan explained. "He said that's when you were most yourself, when you weren't trying to be perfect for everyone else." Margaret traced the edge of the frame, her heart full. "He knew me well." "So do I, Mom," Nathan said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Better now, I think, than I did before, and I'm grateful for that, even if the way we got here was painful." As Nathan returned to the main house, Margaret carried the photograph into her cottage, placing it on the mantel where it seemed to bring fresh life to the space. In Vincent's captured laughter, she saw all the joy they had shared, all the strength he had recognized in her, even when she doubted herself. She moved to the window, looking out at the garden that connected her new home to her son's. The flowers Lily had planted were dormant now, waiting for spring's return, but the structure was in place for future growth, future beauty, much like their family itself. Margaret Sullivan had offered to help, and in doing so, had nearly lost herself. But in reclaiming her dignity, in refusing to be treated as less than she was, she had given her family the greatest help of all, the example of a woman who knew her own worth, who would not be diminished, and who had the courage to demand the respect she deserved. In the quiet of her cottage, surrounded by reminders of both her past and her future, Margaret felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with others' validation and everything to do with her own hard-won self-knowledge. She was not just a supporting character in someone else's story, She was the protagonist of her own life, making choices that honored both her connections to others and her commitment to herself. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last of the summer's warmth and welcoming the crisp clarity of the changing season. Margaret welcomed it too. This new chapter, this hard-earned wisdom, this family rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and respect. She had offered to help, and in the end, by helping herself first, she had helped them all. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel,